We are back, and today we are going to talk more about gender with our senior students. Hi, I'm Nadine Thornhill, sexuality educator, and welcome to my series. This is Safe Sex Ed, where I teach every sex education module from Ontario's 2015 Health and Phys Ed curriculum. So if this is your first time here, you can learn more about this series by clicking the I, and if you would like to subscribe to my channel, which I really hope you do, you can do that by clicking the subscribe button down below. Today, Faye is back to talk to us more about gender. For the folks who are new, tell them about yourselves.
Yeah, so hi everybody, thank you again Nadine for having me. My name is Faye Johnstone, I use she and they pronouns, and I am a sexuality and gender educator based out of Ottawa, but working with LGBTQ youth and also service providers across Ontario to kind of build our capacity to support and affirm LGBTQ kids.
The Health and Phys Ed curriculum for grades 1 through 8 outline the following learning objectives for grade 8.
Demonstrate an understanding of gender identity. Example, male, female, two-spirited, transgender, intersex, gender expression, and identify factors that can help individuals of all identities develop a positive self-concept.
So today we are going to focus mainly on gender identity and gender expression. Now, if you go to the actual curriculum document, this learning objective also includes sexual orientation. And I'm going to do sexual orientation as a separate set of videos, just because I find a lot of people sort of conflate or confuse sexual orientation with gender. And I think, well, for some people they can be related. They're not the same thing. And then you had a really great sort of explanation of intersex and how that relates to gender.
So I am not intersex myself, but the definition that I've usually seen used by intersex folks to define what intersex means is that it's both an identity as well as a term that has historically been medicalized.
Okay.
And so it can capture people whose gender or whose like gender assigned at birth or sex doesn't match with our very rigid understandings of what sex should look like.
Biological sex.
Yeah,
right.
exactly. It can include having things like genitalia that doesn't, like is more ambiguous or doesn't fit into our very rigid categories of being something that you could entirely call a penis or a vulva, or you could be experiencing breast growth when you weren't expected to be somebody who is experiencing breast growth.
Okay, so you have a great activity, and this one is really well suited to youth sort of in the, older tween, early teen years.
So this activity is about, again, like starting to explore what gender means to ourselves and what it means in relationship to other people. And so all you really need for it is some slips of paper and some pencils, which is great. You want to give every person in the classroom a piece of paper, and on that piece of paper you want them to write down what their gender is, so how they would describe it. And then you want them to describe what their gender means to them.
Okay.
So you can use words like, boy or girl, like even like more expression things like masculine, or words like genderqueer or non-binary.
Okay.
And the idea for this is just really to start, again, thinking about our own relationship to gender, because we aren't taught to actually be introspective about how we relate to the gender that we were assigned. Once everyone's had a chance to write down a little bit about their gender and how they experience it on their piece of paper, you're going to ask the classroom what they think gender means to them. And some things that might come up, you can, a lot of the time you get, it's the bits you're born with.
Right.
Or it's, how somebody exists and presents in the world. But just to start, have a bit of an explanation and explore a discussion around what gender is and how it can be something different to each of us. Once the class had a chance to have a bit of a discussion around what gender is,
right.
I usually try to kind of define the difference between gender and sex.
Okay, so what is the difference between gender and biological sex?
So basically when you're born, the doctor looks at you and he's like, oh my goodness, you have these bits and so you must be this gender. But what he's really talking about is your biological sex. Gender is the way that we exist in the world. So it's this socially constructed thing that is actually about how we feel inside ourselves and how we express that to the world around us.
Okay.
And the way that we know that gender is different from biological sex is that it changes over time. If you go back 200 years, the way that we understood men and women were super different than they are today.
Something that I was taught back when I was doing my doctorate, we had a lecture come in and they said, if gender was a fixed thing, we would also see gender presented and gender expression being consistent throughout the world, and we don't.
And so when we talk about gender, we need to acknowledge that, people express and experience their gender in 100 different ways.
Right.
And that a lot of those things are coded. So, somebody like me you expect is wearing a dress, has nice, gorgeous nails, which I do. Thank you. But beyond that, we know that people express and experience that in different ways. Some dudes, again, love dresses, and some women love like jeans and combat boots.
Because all of those things are dope.
Right.
Dope as hell.
Yeah, exactly. And so when we think about gender, we need to acknowledge that it's not intimately and fundamentally connected to the bits that we're born with.
Okay.
Because we all experience and exist in our genders in millions and millions of different ways. Then I want to kind of shift the conversation to talk about stereotypes.
Oh, okay.
Because again, like I remember when I was a young person, like a younger person, growing up, you get all of these images around what a man has to be.
Right.
Like men have to be macho, they need to be lumberjacks and policemen and firefighters, and they have to carry big things. And then, women are supposed to be meek and quiet and
nurturing.
Exactly. They have to love their makeup. They have to look perfect every day.
Right. We have to care about those things. Like we have,
Exactly.
As a woman, you have to care about your weight. You have to care about, how you dress. You have to care about your hair.
Exactly. And so you kind of want to debunk a lot of those stereotypes. Okay. And the best way to do that is by identifying them. You kind of want to ask people where they think these stereotypes come from.
Oh.
So exploring like where do we get these messages, and really unpacking that. So once you've had a chance to kind of explore where some of these stereotypes come from, ask the class why they think it's weird when those stereotypes are contradicted.
Okay.
So now that we've had a chance to unpack some of those gender stereotypes, this is a great opportunity to kind of explore the difference between gender identity and gender expression.
Okay, so what is the difference between the two?
So when you think of identity, I usually describe it as like an internal sense of self.
Okay.
So deep down within each of us, we have this like core feeling about who we are and how we exist in this world.
Okay.
And then on the other hand, you have expression.
Okay.
And so that's really your outward presentation. And that's things that are coded very much in our society. So like I'm wearing nail polish, that's considered to be a femininely coded thing. I have longer hair.
Right.
Really like nice makeup.
Her highlight is amazing.
Oh, you're wonderful. And so gender expression is very much that external presentation of gender. For some people, they're linked. So some people feel like their expression as a woman or identity as a woman goes hand in hand with their feeling of wanting to express in feminine ways and wear dresses and do all of those things. But we also know you have the opposite of that, again, where you have these masculine women who are just as valid and just as much woman and should be just as accepted in expressing their gender in more masculine ways.
Right. Okay. So, I'm a woman and I have this particular presentation, which I would say is more traditionally feminine, but if for some reason I put on a man's suit, which I might, because I can, it doesn't mean that I'm no longer a woman or that I no longer identify as a woman.
Exactly.
They're not the same thing.
When we're talking about gender identity and gender expression, it's really tied to combating gender roles and combating like these sexist ideas that reduce how women can experience their womanhood and men can experience their manhood, and how other people of different genders can experience and express their identities.
Right.
Hand in hand with these conversations around gender identity and gender expression comes the topic of trans people.
Right.
And so I think it's important to ground ourselves in a definition of what does trans mean. For me as an educator and as a trans person, the definition that I use for trans is it's when the gender that you were assigned at birth differs from the gender you identify with.
Okay.
And so the umbrella doesn't just mean, somebody who was assigned, who the doctor thought was a boy who identifies as a woman. It also includes people like non-binary folks.
Okay.
And so non-binary is a term that describes people whose gender doesn't fully or completely fit into the male or the female box.
Do you have to medically transition or change your body to be considered trans?
Not remotely. To be considered trans just means identifying as a different gender than the gender you were assigned at birth.
Okay. So again, because the gender identity is internal, it's not dependent on having any sort of external presentation, be that the way you're dressing or be that, your actual physical body parts.
Exactly. And I think within that, it's really important to still make space for the tons of folks who do feel like there's a connection between their gender identity and the bodies that they were born with.
Right.
And so we need to, make sure that folks who want to have access to things like surgery or hormones, but we shouldn't ever require that. It doesn't make you less trans if you aren't accessing hormones or if you aren't accessing surgery. It doesn't make you less trans if you are not radically changing your presentation. At the end of the day, you are trans because you say you are.
So that's trans, and cis or cisgender is a person who was assigned a gender at birth and they identify with that same gender. Not because cis people are just inherently more easygoing, just sometimes the doctor gets it right.
Exactly. After you spend a bit of time like talking about transgender and cisgender, ask the class how they think they can better respect and support trans people. So you might get a ton of different responses depending on like the knowledge of the classroom, but some core elements to focus on. There's usually 3 that I focus. So the first one is respecting pronouns.
Right.
So pronouns are basically how we like to be referred to and how we refer to other people.
In the third person.
Exactly. Second, it's respecting changes to names.
Right.
So again, similarly, when we grow up, sometimes the doctor, gives us a spontaneous gender based off our bits and decides that, we have to be that person and exist as that person. And a lot of the time our name is coded to that as well.
Right, our family gives us a name.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, oh, this seems like a girl name, or this seems like a boy name.
Exactly. And some trans people change their names. Not all do, but many folks decide that they don't like the gender, or like the name that they were assigned at birth, just like they don't like the gender they were assigned at birth. Finally, it's accepting how people look. As we know, gender identity and gender expression are 2 different things.
Right.
And so it's if we're respecting trans people, it's respecting the fact that trans bodies and trans existences come in 100 million different shapes and sizes. So once you've had a chance to like go around and have that discussion around how to respect trans people, essentially you just want to end by emphasizing that we all deserve to be respected for our identities and our expressions, no matter what those happen to be.
For those of you at home, you can also work to normalize diverse gender identities, diverse gender expressions, and diversity in gender roles. Now, if you have kids or teens at home who are cisgender, this, lets them know that they have options and that there's sort of a broad spectrum in terms of how they express, their own identity and, the roles that they take on as they move through their lives. It also signals to them that, it is important and it is a value of yours that we acknowledge and treat, trans and gender diverse people as the human beings that they are.
Having parents or caregivers who give that positive representation signals to them that they'll be accepted if they do come out.
Right.
But it also lets them explore those different avenues. And that's actually an exciting thing.
Yeah. And that is okay. It is okay if you have a child who, is maybe, not even gender fluid, but like you said,
gender questioning.
Yeah. There's no harm in, accepting your child if one day they're like, girl, maybe, and the next day they're like, I don't know, boy, or nothing.
Gender affirming is really just about validating people's way of existing in this world. And it means they're more likely to grow up into healthy, loving, engaged people and community members. Another thing that I see coming often in my education work, particularly with cisgender folks, and this includes family members or service providers, is that they're terrified of making mistakes.
Right.
And when the biggest mistake they're most often afraid of is using the wrong pronoun towards somebody. Basically, if you misgender somebody, apologize, move forward, correct yourself, and try to do better next time.
Questions that you can ask your tween or teen about gender include, what are some traditional gender roles that appeal to you? What are some non-traditional gender roles that appeal to you? One really fantastic visual aid that you can use to sort of just understand, not only the differences between, gender expression and gender identity and gender roles and sexual orientation, as well as the spectrum of those different aspects of identity, is something called the gender unicorn. Now, some of you might be familiar with a graphic called the genderbread person. This is sort of a similar type graphic, except it's A, more comprehensive, and B, the genderbread person was actually co-opted by a cis person who took it from a trans person. And finally, the gender unicorn, it was developed by the
Trans Student Educational Resources.
Yes, yeah. Thank you. And so if you go to their website, which I will link below, they actually have a guide that will sort of help you navigate conversations related to those concepts. So it's a really great comprehensive resource. You can also check out the website Gender Spectrum. They're an organization in the States that provide education and resources for teachers and also families who have trans and non-binary students or children in their families. And here north of the border, you can check out gendercreativekids.ca. Again, another just like great website with resources and articles and all kinds of information.
So for parents who are looking for more support around how to process the fact that their kid's trans, reach out to other parents of trans kids in your region. Connect with your local community center or community services. And there's also a Facebook group that I very highly recommend called Canadian Parents of Transgender and Gender Diverse Kids.
Yeah.
Another great resource is LGBT Youth Line. So they are a youth-led and peer support-based organization by LGBTQ young people for LGBTQ young people. And a lot of the time, young folks need other young folks to connect with and chat with and get support from. And so they deliver online services, text-based services, and phone call services to LGBTQ young folks.
Finally, the Hospital for Sick Children, or Sick Kids, and CHEO, which is the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, which is here in Ottawa. Sick Kids is in Toronto. They both have trans youth clinics. A concern that parents often have if their children have just come out is, oh my gosh, does this mean I immediately have to take them and get them surgery tomorrow? No, it does not.
It's not how it works.
But connecting with these clinics can be, really helpful. You can talk to doctors and medical professionals who can not only walk you through sort of what the options are in terms of medical transition and how that process goes. They can also just sort of help you, help support your kids in terms of, staying healthy. Again, they have resources. There's a lot of support.
And if you're not from Ottawa or Toronto, it can be harder to access resources. Check in with your local pride organizations. Again, community health centers can be great places that start accessing broader resources.
That wraps up our lesson about gender for our senior elementary students. So you're going to be back for one more video, but in the meantime, where can folks connect with you?
So I have a website at fayejohnstone.com, just because my name is very interesting to spell. That is FAEJOHNSTONE.com.
Yep.
And then on Twitter as well at fayejohnstone, one word.
Before we go, let us know what are some of your favorite traditional and non-traditional gender roles or forms of gender expression. That's all for now. Hope you have a great day, and we will see you soon. Bye.
Bye.
You can help me continue creating free sex ed content by supporting me on Patreon. For as little as $3 a month, you'll get access to all sorts of goodies, so head on over to patreon.com/Nadine Thornhill or click the link down in the description below.